October 16, 1962, Washington, D.C. Alexander Ivanov smoothed his tie as he entered the State Department building, nodding at the security guard who had come to recognize him over the past 18 months. At 34, Alex had established himself as a promising diplomatic attaché, his Russian heritage conveniently explained by grandparents who had fled the Bolshevik Revolution. The fabricated background had withstood scrutiny. Few questioned the patriotism of a man who had graduated from Yale and served honorably in Korea. "Morning, Mr. Ivanov," the guard said. "Morning, Frank. Looks like it's going to be another beautiful day." But inside, Alex felt nothing but tension. The previous days, two spy plane photographs confirming Soviet missile installations in Cuba had thrown the diplomatic corps into chaos. President Kennedy had been briefed, and an executive committee formed. The Americans now knew what Moscow had denied for weeks. What they didn't know was that Alex, born Alexei Ivanovich in Leningrad, had been sending warnings about the American intelligence gathering to his KGB handlers for the past week. As a mid-level State Department analyst with access to diplomatic cables, he occupied the perfect position to monitor America's response to Khrushchev's gamble. Alex took the elevator to the third floor, where he joined colleagues already huddled around the coffee machine, voices hushed but urgent. "They say Kennedy's going to blockade Cuba," whispered Thomas Whitfield, a fellow analyst. "Naval quarantine. They're avoiding the word blockade for legal reasons." "When?" Alex asked, keeping his voice casual while his heart hammered. A blockade meant confrontation with Soviet vessels, potential flashpoints that could escalate within hours. "XCOM is meeting again today. Announcement possibly tomorrow." Alex nodded, sipping his coffee to hide his expression. He needed to get this information to Moscow immediately, but his next scheduled dead drop wasn't until Friday. 3 days could mean the difference between peace and nuclear war. As he settled at his desk, Alex found a memo requesting his presence at a 2 p.m. briefing, unusual for his level. He'd been chosen as part of a small team to draft diplomatic language for the potential quarantine announcement. The Americans trusted him completely. The irony wasn't lost on Alex. 8 years undercover in America had transformed him. He had friends here, enjoyed baseball, dated American women. His handler in Moscow had warned about this, the gradual, invisible erosion of ideological certainty. Yet he remained committed to his mission, believing that only by helping maintain balance between the superpowers could he prevent war. At noon, Alex made an excuse about forgotten paperwork and left the building, walking briskly to Lafayette Square. He needed to signal for an emergency meeting, a dangerous deviation from established protocol. The park bench near the northeast corner served as an emergency signal site. Sitting down, Alex opened his newspaper, folded it precisely, and left it behind when he departed 3 minutes later. The newspaper contained nothing, but its position and folding pattern communicated urgency to the KGB surveillance team that maintained loose coverage of central Washington. Back at his desk, Alex reviewed the latest intelligence reports, his stomach churning. The missiles in Cuba could reach Washington in under 15 minutes. He had no illusions about what nuclear war would mean. There would be no winners, only degrees of devastation. At 7:30 p.m., after the briefing and subsequent work drafting diplomatic language, Alex left the office. Instead of heading to his apartment, he walked to the National Gallery of Art, open late on Tuesdays. Near the American Impressionist exhibit, he paused before a Child Hassan painting. "Beautiful handling of light," said a voice beside him. Leonid, his cutout, the buffer between Alex and the KGB resident in Washington. "I prefer the Dutch masters," Alex replied, completing the recognition phrase. They moved casually through the gallery, appearing to be nothing more than two art enthusiasts. "You've broken protocol," Leonid said quietly. "The situation warrants it. Kennedy is implementing a naval quarantine around Cuba. They'll announce it tomorrow. Soviet ships will be intercepted." Leonid's pace faltered slightly. "You're certain?" "I helped draft the diplomatic communication. The Americans have photographs of the missile sites. They know everything." "Time of announcement?" 7 p.m. tomorrow. Televised address to the nation. Your report will be transmitted to Moscow immediately, Leonid said. Continue monitoring the situation. We need to know if military options beyond the quarantine are being considered. There are hawks pushing for airstrikes against the missile sites. McNamara is advocating restraint, but the military is pressing for decisive action. They separated at different exits, Alex stepping into the cool October evening, wondering if these perfect fall days were numbered. The weight of history pressed down on him, millions of lives potentially hinging on decisions made in the coming hours. October 20th, 1962, Washington, D.C. 4 days later, Alex sat in a secure room at the State Department, part of a crisis response team monitoring Soviet ship movements. Kennedy's quarantine announcement had sent shockwaves around the world. The Soviets had denounced it as piracy and aggression. Several Soviet ships were continuing toward the quarantine line, including the tanker Bucharest, which American intelligence believed might be carrying missile components. The Bucharest is maintaining course and speed, announced a naval officer, pointing to a map. Intercept projected for 0700 tomorrow. Alex felt sweat beading at his hairline. If the Soviets refused to stop, the U.S. Navy would board the vessel, an act the USSR could consider war. He had transmitted this information through emergency channels, but had heard nothing back. Was Moscow deliberately pushing toward confrontation? As the meeting adjourned, Assistant Secretary Walton approached Alex. Ivanov, we need someone to help translate and analyze some intercepted communications. Your Russian background makes you ideal. Alex nodded, maintaining his composure. Of course, sir. Anything to help. Good man. Report to room 414 in 30 minutes. Alex excused himself to use the restroom, locking himself in a stall and breathing deeply. This could be trouble. While his cover documentation said his Russian came from his family background, enhanced by language courses, he would need to be careful not to appear too fluent with Soviet idioms or military terminology. In room 414, Alex found himself with 3 CIA analysts and a stack of transcripts, intercepted radio communications between Soviet vessels and their command. We've had our regular translators go through these, explained the senior CIA man, but we need fresh eyes on the nuance. Anything that might indicate whether they'll turn back or challenge the quarantine. For the next 4 hours, Alex carefully reviewed the transcripts, deliberately misinterpreting certain military jargon, then correcting himself to maintain cover while ensuring the Americans received mostly accurate information. He emphasized passages suggesting Soviet captains had discretion to avoid confrontation. There's ambiguity here, he noted, pointing to a particular exchange. But it seems to indicate they're awaiting final instructions rather than committed to breaking the quarantine. The CIA man nodded thoughtfully. That tracks with other intelligence. Khrushchev may be looking for a diplomatic off-ramp. By the time he left the State Department that night, Alex was exhausted. The strain of performing for both sides, knowing the stakes, had drained him completely. He took an indirect route home, using counter-surveillance techniques out of habit rather than immediate necessity, traversing through department stores and hotel lobbies, doubling back unexpectedly. At his apartment, he found his door unlocked. Every instinct screamed danger, but returning to the street might draw attention. He entered cautiously. "You should be more careful, Alexander Alexeyevich," came a voice from his darkened living room. Colonel Dmitry Sokolov, the KGB resident himself, sat in Alex's armchair. This unprecedented direct contact with his highest superior violated all protocols. "Sir," Alex said, closing the door, "this is extremely dangerous?" "Yes, but necessary." Sokolov activated a small device that emitted a soft hum, a rudimentary countermeasure against listening devices. "Moscow is concerned about the reliability of your information. Everything I've reported is accurate. Perhaps, but there are questions about where your loyalties truly lie after so many years in America." The accusation hung in the air. Alex felt a cold dread. Suspicion from Moscow at this critical moment could be a death sentence. "I've served the Soviet Union faithfully for 12 years, Alex said carefully. "My reports have been consistently validated." Sokolov studied him, Then you'll have no objection to providing proof of your commitment. We need technical documents on the American nuclear response protocols. The actual coded procedures, not just the policy outlines you've provided. Those are compartmentalized. I don't have access. But your office neighbor, Charles Westfield, does. His safe contains what we need. Alex felt sick. You're asking me to commit a break-in during the highest alert status since the war? The building's security has been doubled. I'm not asking, comrade. Sokolov stood. Moscow requires certainty about American intentions. If they will launch a first strike against our homeland, we must know. And if I'm caught? Then you die for your country, like millions of our countrymen before you. Sokolov moved to the door. You have 48 hours. The world may not have much longer than that. After Sokolov left, Alex sat in the darkness, mind racing. Breaking into Westfield's safe would be nearly impossible without detection. And for what? To provide Moscow with information that might accelerate nuclear escalation rather than defuse it? Yet refusing meant being branded a traitor by his own country. October 22, 1962, Washington, D.C. Kennedy's address to the nation had occurred the previous evening. America was officially on DEFCON 3 war footing. Strategic air command bombers were in the air, nuclear weapons ready. The quarantine line was established, with U.S. Navy vessels prepared to intercept Soviet ships approaching Cuba. Alex had spent a sleepless night weighing impossible choices. By morning, he'd made his decision. If he couldn't prevent himself from becoming a pawn in the standoff, perhaps he could act as a bridge instead. At the State Department, he observed the heightened security. Armed military police now supplemented the usual guards, and ID checks were thorough. Everyone moved with grim determination, faces etched with the strain of knowing they were hours away from potential war. He found Assistant Secretary Walton alone in his office, reviewing cables. "Sir, may I speak with you privately? It's urgent." Walton looked up, surprised. "Of course, Ivanov." Closed the door. Alex took a breath. What he was about to do would end his life as he knew it, one way or another. "Sir, I need to speak with someone from counterintelligence immediately. I have information critical to national security that can't wait." Walton's expression hardened. "What kind of information?" "I'm not at liberty to say, sir, but it concerns the current crisis directly." 3 hours later, Alex sat in a sparse interrogation room in the FBI's Washington field office. He had been searched, his diplomatic credentials temporarily confiscated. Across from him sat Special Agent Thomas Landry, a veteran counterintelligence officer, and a silent man who had been introduced only as Mr. Wells from the CIA. "Mr. Ivanov," Landry began, "you've requested this meeting at considerable risk to yourself. We're listening." Alex met their eyes. "My name is not Alexander Ivanov. I am Colonel Alexei Ivanovich Kuznetsov, Directorate Officer of the Committee for State Security. I have been operating under deep cover in your State Department for 8 years." The silence that followed was absolute. Wells' hand had moved slightly toward his jacket, but otherwise neither man betrayed surprise. "I'm here because we are hours away from nuclear war, and I believe I can help prevent it." For the next 2 hours, Alex provided details of his recruitment, training, and placement. He explained the KGB's interest in the missile crisis and their growing fear that America was planning a first strike. "Moscow doesn't fully understand your government's decision-making process," Alex explained. "They see military preparations but can't distinguish between defensive posturing and offensive preparation. They've ordered me to obtain nuclear response protocols, which I believe would only increase the danger." "Why are you telling us this now?" Wells finally spoke, his voice measured. "Because I've come to believe that neither side wants war, but both are prepared to start one out of fear of the other striking first. It's madness." "What exactly are you proposing?" Landry asked. "Let me send one last message to Moscow, under your supervision. Let me tell them the truth, that America is preparing to defend itself but is actively seeking diplomatic resolution. That the quarantine is a measured response, not a prelude to invasion." Wells and Landry exchanged glances. You realize this could be interpreted as treason by your government, Wells said. Yes, but I've lived among Americans long enough to know they don't want this war any more than the Russian people do. Some things transcend nationality. After consultation with superiors, a remarkable plan took shape. Alex would send a final message to Moscow through established channels, but with content approved by American intelligence. It would contain enough verifiable truths to be credible, along with key insights into American thinking that might defuse rather than inflame tensions. October 24, 1962. Washington, D.C. The naval quarantine was fully implemented. Soviet vessels were approaching the interception line, with the world holding its breath to see if they would stop or challenge the blockade. In Moscow, the Kremlin weighed its options: back down or escalate. Alex composed his message in a safe house under FBI supervision. It detailed the American position accurately. The quarantine was a measured response designed specifically to avoid war while removing the missiles. Kennedy was looking for a diplomatic solution that would allow Khrushchev to save face. Most critically, America had no plans for a first strike or invasion of Cuba if the Soviets cooperated with missile removal. The message included intelligence about American military preparedness that Moscow could verify through other sources, lending credibility to Alex's assessment. It suggested that a negotiated resolution, perhaps trading the Jupiter missiles in Turkey for the Soviet missiles in Cuba, could satisfy both sides. Will they believe it? Landry asked as Alex finished. My reports have always been accurate. They have no reason to doubt this one, Alex replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. If Sokolov passes it up the chain unaltered. The message was transmitted through Alex's established channels, with American intelligence monitoring the response. Now they could only wait. At the White House, Kennedy and his advisors received hourly updates on the positions of Soviet ships. The first test would come with the tanker Bucharest, now 200 miles from the quarantine line. In the FBI safe house, Alex paced, his future as uncertain as the world's. If Moscow accepted his assessment, he was still a traitor. If they rejected it, nuclear war might follow within days. October 25, 1962. Washington, D.C. The Bucharest has stopped, Landry announced, entering the safe house with fresh news. And reports indicate other Soviet vessels have either stopped or turned around. Alex closed his eyes briefly in relief. Khrushchev is signaling willingness to negotiate. Your message may have helped, Wells acknowledged, entering behind Landry. Though we'll never know for certain. What happens now? Alex asked. Diplomatically, back-channel negotiations will intensify. The public confrontation will continue while private compromises are explored. I meant to me. Wells and Landry exchanged glances. That depends on your cooperation, Wells said. You possess valuable intelligence about KGB operations, personnel, and methods. Alex understood the implication. Freedom of a sort, in exchange for betraying the entirety of his former life and colleagues. And if the crisis resolves peacefully? Will you acknowledge my role? History is rarely so generous to those caught between great powers, Mr. Ivanov, Wells replied. Or should I say, Colonel Kuznetsov. February 3, 1963. Undisclosed location, Virginia. Alex, now living under yet another name, stood at the window of his isolated farmhouse, watching snow blanket the fields. His KGB handler Sokolov had been quietly expelled from the U.S. after the crisis, declared persona non grata without public explanation. The Jupiter missiles in Turkey were being dismantled, though the American public wouldn't know this was part of the secret agreement with the Soviets. Khrushchev had removed the missiles from Cuba, ending the immediate crisis. The FBI maintained discreet surveillance, and Alex provided regular debriefings on Soviet intelligence operations, though his usefulness diminished with each passing month. He was neither prisoner nor free man, a ghost existing in the margins between superpowers. A car appeared on the long driveway, unusual for this isolated property. As it approached, Alex recognized Wells behind the wheel. The CIA man entered without ceremony, brushing snow from his coat. We've intercepted a KGB communication, Wells said without preamble. They've identified your defection and attributed the failure of their Cuba gambit partly to your betrayal. Alex absorbed this. They've sentenced me to death. In absentia, yes. They'll look for you. They'll never stop looking. Wells nodded. We're moving you tomorrow. New identity, new location. The farmhouse in Montana is ready. After Wells departed, Alex returned to the window, watching darkness fall over the winter landscape. He had helped prevent a nuclear holocaust, yet would live the remainder of his life in shadows, belonging nowhere, claimed by neither side in a Cold War that had almost gone hot. In saving millions of unknown lives, he had forfeited his own, a trade he would make again without hesitation. History would never record his choice or his sacrifice. But perhaps, in the long ledger of human affairs, such anonymous acts of conscience mattered most of all.